Nice. I thought it would be nice to put a photo of me working on this talk in the first slide. So there we go. As Andy said, my name's Frank. I'm a designer, illustrator, and writer. I also help run a little software company called Abstract, but none of that really matters today because Andy has specifically asked me to talk about creativity and independence, and those two things sort of smushed together. So I'm not going to show any of my work today. Instead, I'm just going to sort of say that I'm up here because I'm like all of you. I'm up here because I need to make things. And I think need is the right word. I've sort of been taking stock of myself this past year, just sort of trying to better understand where I thrive and where I don't do so well. And I've sort of noticed something interesting about myself. It seems like if I go longer than 3 or 4 days without like a solid hour alone with my sketchbook, I sort of just wilt over like a houseplant that isn't being appropriately watered. It's totally crazy. And I've been thinking about this, like, why do I have to do this? What does this actually give me? And one of the things that I've realized about myself is that for me, making is actually a way that I engage with the world. It's a way that I process it. It's how I understand it. And I think all of us, we tap into creativity in our own ways. But there's only some of us who have developed a dependency on it. I call that dependency the creative hunger. And yeah, it's like a little bit of like heart clutching. It sounds like something you would like read in a poem and sort of roll your eyes at. But it's the best way that I've found to describe a creative person's motivation for doing some things that frankly would seem, well, kind of weird by other people's standards. You know, it's best to call it a hunger because you go make something and then it fades away. You get hungry again. And you're driven by this. It's a compulsion. And I bet a lot of folks in this room also have that same creative hunger. You know, it's why you draw the comics. It's why you take photographs. It's why you make music. It's why you write code or anything else. So all of us in here, we're all of a similar kind. You know, we're bound together, I think, and driven by this other hunger that we have. So how big is this club? Well, to start, how many of us are in this room? Andy, you're over here. How many folks are in here? Oh, Andy left. OK. There is now one fewer person in this room. 700-ish? 840, Andy says. 840 people. All right. So I look at that, 700-ish, 1,000, something like that. So there's a shitload of people here. And there's like even more out there in the world, right? And you can keep on drawing that question back and back. And you can say like, well, how many people ever? And then like if I zoom way out, I think of like an even bigger question, which is like, how long has this hunger been around? I went looking for that answer, and it led me into a dark place. This is a cave. This is the cave of El Castillo. It's in the north of Spain. And if you take a few steps into that darkness right there, you're going to find this. OK. It's a handprint. And it doesn't really look like much, but I actually think that it's everything. So scientists, they've done some radioactive dating, and it tells us that this handprint is almost 41,000 years old. It's the oldest art on record. So this, what we're looking at right here, this is actually the mother of creation. And mother is exactly the right word, because they measured the length of each individual finger, and based on the relative length of those fingers, they determined that the first artist was a woman. Yeah. Very cool. So what that means is that 41 millennia ago, a woman put some ochre into a hollow bone. She holds her hand up to the wall of a dark cave and sprays the pigment out of that bone around the perimeter of her hand. And she leaves a mark. And then some people come along 1,600 generations later, and they find it. So we've been making things for a long, long, long time. Now, it's impossible to know why she left that mark. Some archaeologists, they think it's a practical measure. They say it was to help her find her way out of the dark. Other people say that it came from a belief in magic. But these are only guesses. And even still, like 41,000 years later, I think it's still difficult to understand why we choose to make the things that we do. So why did somebody make this? Or this? Why did somebody make this? It loops. That's the magic of GIFs. So now that I know that there's like 8,000 of you, or however many, that's exactly what I'm going to do whenever I finish this talk. I'm going to like go jump out and like have a shot of whiskey or something. Anyway, I'd like you to do something for me, okay? Just take a moment and think about the last personally significant thing that you made. You got it? Okay. Why did you do it? Why did you make that thing? Was it to say something important? Did you make it out of a belief in magic? Did you make it to help yourself find your way out of a dark place? So how much has changed in 41,000 years? Now, one thing, it definitely persists. Making things is really freaking hard. You know, we all know the frustration and doubt of getting an idea out of your head, out into the world, and never mind like sharing it with other people or dealing with their thoughts or their opinions about what we've made. So to me, it seems intuitive that art would be born in a mysterious and hidden place, because both creativity and caves, they both force you to navigate in the dark. You go by feel with unsteady footing, you run your fingers along the edges of whatever's within your reach, and you take it one step at a time, right? So it's only after you're out of the dark that those choices, they seem inevitable. But even then, finding the way out, I've realized that it can shake the most experienced and the most talented of us. I was at the first XOXO. I think it was in 2012. This says 2013. I'm happy to be wrong. It was a few years ago. This is back when it was a handful of people and some goats across the street. If you were there, you remember that. Goat fans rejoice. Yeah, and if you think that's a joke, you should talk to one of the Andes. It's Portland, there really were some goats across the street, and everyone was delighted. Anyway, I was there the first year, and I'm not really sure what I was expecting, but I was totally just like surprised by how bittersweet most of the talks were. You know, you'd expect to hear something different from folks who were so accomplished and so creative and talented. But that bittersweet tone, it made total sense to me. Independence and creativity, they're definitely not all sunshine. And if you put creativity and independence together, it's like doubly not all sunshine, right? So I was having a hard year that year. So I really appreciated and identified with hearing some honest talk about the struggles that independent creative folks face. So independence is a choice, right? It's also a sacrifice as well. So you gain some things and you lose some other things. So by choosing to go independent, you get to say hello to control, to equity, to transparency, to freedom, but you also need to sacrifice some things, right? So you're saying goodbye to stability, to predictability, to resources. And this is the kicker for me, coherence. Just the thought of all the things that you're doing actually culminating and coming together into something that makes sense to somebody else. A lot of times Americans are like obsessed with asking other people what they do. And that's actually really hard to explain if you're an independent creative person. So is the trade worth it? Well, I am happy to be the last speaker here at possibly the last XOXO and to offer a resounding maybe. If you guys have never had really big words behind you, I recommend it. So maybe, and that's the bittersweet part, right? So independent folks, we get to feel the pride and have a flexibility that's just inaccessible to most people. But we're also more acutely vulnerable because we're mostly out there unprotected. So at that first XOXO, I only wrote one thing in my notebook. It was from a talk by Christina Shi. Here's the quote. It's 3 little words. Independence is lonely. Even years later, it still punches me in the gut. And it seems so obvious, right? But I hadn't even thought about it until then. So independence means that you're on your own. So you can do things your own way and you can claim all of those successes, But you also need to do the work of defining your own path, endure all the struggles along the way, and own all of the failures. Independence is lonely. It feels true. I know it's true based on my experience. But is it necessary? This is a cartoon by a guy named Hugh MacLeod. He says the price of being a sheep is boredom, and the price of being a wolf is loneliness. In my experience as a lone wolf, it says that he's right. But I also hope it doesn't have to be that way. Of course, there's lone wolves and independent creatives, but wolves are also pack animals, aren't they? So how do you reconcile those two things? How can we be independent together? Now, that cartoon, it's actually kind of misleading. And it's, I would say, sort of dangerous in the way that it reduces and simplifies the truth and leaves out a lot of things. But it's also catchy, so it tends to go a little bit further than it should, maybe. And for people like me, I put too much credence in it because it's catchy. The other problem with it is it just ignores that there are so many flavors and ways to be independent. There are lots of ways of being independent and of working with other people. So on the flight out, I was just like sitting with my sketchbook, getting that time that I really wanted. And I was like, okay, well, what are the ways that people can work with each other? And these should be pretty obvious, right? So first off, there's employment, right? And employment is just working for someone. There's collaboration. Collaboration is working with someone. There's also community, which is important. We'll talk about that in a minute. Community, the way that I think about it as working beside someone. And none of these are mutually exclusive, so you can take all three of these things and mix them up however you like. And each combination sort of produces its own kind of independence, I think. So everyone can find something that I think works for them. I'm going to focus on community and employment today because I think that those feel the most appropriate. And also, I just don't have enough time. All right, let's start with community, right? I'm not going to rock the boat too much here. I'm going to say that community is absolutely critical for creative people, for producing, because creativity, it's just so much, it's so inwardly focused. And I find that it's so helpful to be pulled out of that system. Otherwise, I can just drown in myself. You know, you need someone to pull you out. And I've worked in seclusion before. And after 2 weeks, I'm like talking to houseplants. It's really bad. The other benefit of community is that it sort of creates this safe space where people can identify and sympathize with each other. Not necessarily because like we need to complain about things, we do, but it means that you can share your work inside of a place or talk about your work in a place where people can sort of understand what it means to have an idea that you're not really quite sure how to explain. I think that that is like one of the most important things about community. I see community as people working parallel to one another. We're sharing information and resources freely with each other, and this is how useful information, it spreads. It's how creative people find new opportunities, right? And it's also how scenes get started. This is good stuff. Let's move on to employment. Now, many people presume that employment is the opposite of independence, and that really gets on my nerves. If you go back and look, history is going to show you a long list of artists who decided to keep their day job. And they did that to fuel their creative practice. So if you work as a barista or a graphic designer or an accountant to fund your true passion, poetry, I think that that's great. That means that you're joining ranks of T.S. Eliot, Herman Melville, the god Toni Morrison, right? And more. You know, you type it into Google, artist, day job, famous, and you just see lists and lists of people. It's really encouraging. There's a lot of good reasons to keep your day job going while you make your work, especially if you have kids or you're not fortunate enough to be young and healthy. But there's like one important benefit that I actually don't hear mentioned very often that I just wanted to drop here today. Because if your income isn't tied to your capacity or your ability to make a certain kind of work, it means you don't have to take any shit from anybody. It means that you can just like make whatever you want to make. And what's more independent than that? Now, this is not me making an argument for everybody to go out and like get day jobs or keep their day jobs. I'm lucky enough to make a living doing the work that I set out to do so long ago. And I think a lot of people out here are probably doing their own version of that same thing. But I also believe that there's a lot of things to learn from the folks who chose to keep their day job and who are finding ways to fulfill their creative hunger outside of how they choose to earn money. The primary thing is that you can distance yourself from that creative work and properly prioritize it inside of your life. Speaking from my experience and the creative people that I've surrounded myself with through my whole life, creative folks, we have a tendency to identify too closely with our craft. So when things go poorly, there's a high likelihood that we're going to topple over. I want to share a quote from Krista Tippett. She's a radio host. She has a great show called On Being. You should check out the podcast. This is from an interview with her on a website called The Great Discontent. Here's what she says. I worry about a focus on meaningful work. I think that's possible for some of us, but I don't want us to locate the meaningfulness of our lives in our work. I think that was a 20th century trap. I'm very committed and fond of the language of vocation, which I think became narrowly tied to our job titles in the 20th century. Our vocations or callings as human beings may be located in our job descriptions, but they may also be located in how we are present to whatever it is we do. Now, I'm gonna admit this. Like, I identify too closely with my work, and that leads to a lot of stress and depression and doubt when things aren't going too well. Maybe you as well. And some of that unsteadiness, like, that's on us, right? But I think it's also important to acknowledge that the culture around us and the environments where we're working, they also have a huge impact on our disposition. Independency is turbulent enough, but there's other factors contributing to the unsteadiness. And I thought being here and sort of trying to bookend the day would be a good time to try to ask a few questions and have all of us think about it, how we can make some changes. So here's a few critical questions. First, how do we create a cultural awareness that attention doesn't usually lead to money? People assume that, yeah, you can clap towards that. All right, so people assume because they've heard of you, because they know your work, because they like your work, because they can see how much money you raised on Kickstarter or how many followers you have on Twitter or Instagram or anywhere else, they assume that you're raking it in. But this is like an old pre-internet mindset that just seems to persist. But everybody here knows that likes and shares don't buy groceries. So those mix-ups, they create a lot of pain for the folks who are fortunate enough to have an audience who care about their work, but unfortunate enough to go underpaid for it. It's almost like we need to have like a public service campaign where we like buy ads on billboards beside the highway and on subways that just say things like how much money you get paid by YouTube if you make a video that gets 1 million views. I spent a long time on the internet trying to figure that out. I ran the math. Most of the stats that I saw said somewhere around $3,000 for 1 million views. I don't know if that's right. I think it varies from person to person. But holy shit, that's huge. I think people need to know about the economics of the attention economy. Here's the second question. How do we produce more equitable platforms where attention does equal proportionate money? So the heart of that problem is that consolidation, it makes discovery easier for users, but it also makes exploitation easier for the platforms. So it means that what's good for the audience eventually becomes unsustainable for the creatives unless those platforms somehow remain altruistic. Third, how do we build up services for independent artists that act as a sidekick rather than a toll booth? The point of these services should be to provide access to resources and expertise for everyone, because so many of us are not good at everything that it takes to run a creative business. And by having these services, I think it opens up to people who are smart enough to know the difference between DIY, do it yourself, and I gotta read this so I get the acronym right, do it all yourself and probably a bunch of it poorly. If you're looking for a catchy catchphrase, it's Dia Yapa Boep. Hashtag Dia Yapa Boep. All right, here's another one that I've kind of been thinking about over the last few weeks too. If you're fortunate enough to have an audience, how do you honor that audience without letting them have too much power over you? And as a fan or someone who supports other independent creative people, how can I be more constructively supportive for them? I've been thinking a lot about this guy over the last few weeks. He's been in my ears. This is Frank Ocean. Been listening to that new album like crazy, just sort of like turning over the situation that he's been in for the last few years. The rundown of that is he released a record 4 years ago. It was enormous because it was amazing and some of my very favorite music. And then he just sort of dropped off the map for 4 years, sort of teasing people that he was going to be releasing a new album soon, but it took 4 years. And in those intervening 4 years, the situation was not great. People were angry, people were making jokes about it, and I've had like a small flavor of this, like getting into a Kickstarter campaign and having it take longer than I expected, and everybody was really nice, and it still really stressed me out. So I'm thinking about Frank Ocean and what it's like if everybody isn't really nice, and what if the stakes are higher? What's it like to release an album to a group of people like that? That leads me to think about this stallion right here. This is George R.R. Martin. He's the author of the Song and Ice and Fire books, better known as Game of Thrones to most people. So the TV show is based on the books, and the story's not finished. He's got like 17 or 18 more books to write or something like that. And you got nerds out there like Ren and Math, like, well, it takes him 7 years if like he speaks at this conference, but not if he speaks at this other one. And people are worried about him dying before he finishes the series. And that's just like mayhem to me. It's total madness because on one hand, you're right to be hungry for a good story, but on the other, like we gotta be sympathetic towards each other, especially as a community of people who make things. And I know that it's like kind of hard to sympathize for these two guys because they're so successful, right? What I'm talking about is a problem of success, but we need to make sure that it's not taboo to talk about the problems of success if we want to be successful. If we want ourselves and other people to be successful, we need to address the problems on the other side as well. I don't want to drown in other people's expectations. My own are hard enough, thank you very much. Now, all of this it's really important work in my opinion. And I think it's going to take a community effort for us to address it and to improve it. I'm thinking about this because it's sort of like, it's almost like a climate. It's a cultural thing. And I think the change is going to start with the folks in this room. The trick is going to be providing terms and expectations that are beneficial for everybody. Because if we truly believe that creativity is a lifelong pursuit, we need to develop sustainable ways of engaging with each other that value the longevity of the work and the people who make it. It's a fair trade, right? To get the fruits of each other, we need to take care of each other. Because we only deserve what we can protect and what we can maintain. Independents are exposed to enough risk, so we need to stick together. Now, I have made a lot of things in my life, and most of it didn't fly because, frankly, it wasn't very good. But every once in a while, I get to make something that actually goes somewhere. And when I look at the situation, I've come to believe that it has very little to do with me. I've seen it happen for other people too. You know, you draw the comic, you write the book, you record the song, and it makes its way out into the world, and then talks back to you through the people who found it. If what you make goes anywhere, it's because other people carried it. And that's really weird, isn't it? Because this thing that you've made, like it's from you, and it feels like you, but it really isn't you. It goes out there, and it's not yours anymore. Your thing becomes our thing. And that means successful independence, it's always supported by codependence. I want to finish up by going back to the cave. While I was researching El Castillo, I found that there were several other caves sprinkled around France and Spain with art from around the same period, you know, give or take 1,000 years. My favorite, though, was in Argentina. It's a place called Cueva de las Manos, Cave of the Hands. If you go there, here's what you see. So it's not one hand, but several. It's not one person, but many. And it's not one time, but years, centuries. These hand marks, they go from the Paleolithic to the Bronze Age and even into the Middle Ages. So we've been going to the cave for a long time to leave our mark and satisfy that hunger. The hunger to make things, that's inevitable for some of us. But we also so quickly forget that it's malleable. There's so many ways to be independent and so many choices that we can make about how to satisfy our creative hunger and situate it in our lives and place it appropriately. But I think all of those choices begin with one. Will you go alone, or shall we go together? Thanks.